So we're going to go over a book review and a biography on Benjamin Franklin. So you probably heard a lot of things are named after Benjamin Franklin. You probably heard a lot about him. But if you go and watch movies on him, they always leave out a very important part of his life. And that was that he knew Jesus Christ as his Savior, for sure. In fact, he became an evangelist in his printing shop and he shared the sermons of George Wycliffe and gave them out. So some of the first tracts ever were given out by Benjamin Franklin, at least the first tracts in America. So it makes me smile when I'm talking about him right now. So let's get into his life because he truly was a patriot. So, Benjamin Franklin. First of all, let's start with his father. So, his father was named Josiah, and he immigrated to America to escape religious persecution in England. So, we look at Josiah and his wife at that time, and they were similar to pilgrims coming to America. So, they knew the Lord, they knew the Puritan religion, as they were coming. And of course, they came to Massachusetts. And that's where most Puritans came, is to Massachusetts, especially Boston. So, 1685, going back, this is before America was a nation, 1685, he came here with three of his children. Benjamin wasn't born yet. And so, because of course, they didn't want to be under the oppression that they were feeling, and they couldn't worship as they would in England. The Anglican Church became very legalistic in many ways. So as they came, they settled in Boston. He was a dyer by trade. That means he dyed clothing. But when they came to Massachusetts, it was very hard. People didn't really care so much about dyed clothing, I guess. So, but anyway, he had 7 children by his first wife, and then he married his second wife because his first wife passed away. So, and his second wife was named Abiah. And with Abiah, he had 10 more children. 10. So, totally, Josiah had 17 children. Now, that was kind of common back there. People had large families, but indeed, this was a large Puritan family. Well, Benjamin was the 15th child. He had 2 younger sisters, but he had all these other siblings that were older than him. Number 15. And he was born on January 6, 1706. That was his birthday. They moved into their house there. The house that they had in Boston was about 20 feet by 30 feet, but it was 3 stories high. That's not very big for how many? 17 children and 2 adults? Well, Benjamin, of course, was one of the babies, especially a baby boy. And so he was very attractive little boy, and he was very intelligent. And I think a lot of times the youngest be very intelligent because they're around older siblings. And he was around older siblings that were a lot older than he was, that were adults even. So was very, very intelligent, but he didn't have access to school, like we do. So, but anyway, going back to Josiah, his dad. Of course, he was a dyer, to dye clothes, but that wasn't, was kind of hard. He didn't really make a good living. So he became what was called a tallow chandler. And a tallow chandler, if you translate that, it means he was a candle maker. Back then, they didn't have electricity, so everyone had to have candles at night. Otherwise, it would be pitch dark. There was no way that you could read at night or do anything unless you had candles. So he was a candle maker. So Josiah also, he was a man of prayer, so he prayed over his children all the time. He also did Bible studies with them. He studied the Bible as his main book. And he played the violin. And he sang, with the violin, he sang songs and wrote, songs for all of his kids. And he'd get all his kids together and
he would sing to them. So he was pretty much, like a happy-go-lucky guy too. And he had a good audience when he would play his music, and he'd have his children join in and sing, and they'd sing songs about the Lord. And so both he and his wife Abiah, they both, they both loved the Lord. So Benjamin was raised in the beginning of his life to love the Lord, but he was also he became kind of skeptical after a while, especially of the Puritan church. We'll find that out later on. So Benjamin was 7 years old, and um, basically Benjamin Franklin wrote his autobiography even back when he was 7 years old. When he was 7 years old, he hadn't been to school, and he knew how to read though, because he read everything. He even read the Bible, before that. He goes, I don't even know what day it was when I learned to read, because I must have been so young. And as for now school, everyone said that he had 10. They called him a 10 talent child. That means he had 10 times of talents. So they saw that he was very exceptional, an exceptional child. But that didn't make a difference, because in those times to go through school, even to be go someplace sent out to school, would cost some money. So he didn't have schooling like we see public schooling, but they didn't have public schools in that time. So, but anyway, he was put to work making candles, which he did not like at all. His, he didn't like using his nimble fingers and put them together in the wicks and everything, and he just couldn't stand making candles. But that's what he had to do. So he made his candles, and his first money that he got, basically he probably got a few cents, from for making candles, and his mom would probably say, "Oh, maybe we should find something else for Benjamin to do," but he had to make candles. So he got his first money, and he went off to buy something. They said, "You can buy some," thinking he'd buy some sweets. The first thing. And there was an area there, store there type to go, trading store. So he went to the trading store, and he had enough to buy some food and sweets and what he wanted. But as he's 7 years old, he went in and he saw and he looked, and he saw these little contraptions. Like, what is this? And so he picked up these contraptions, and he was like, "What do you do with these?" And so the guy put them in the mouth. It was a whistle. And so he was so intrigued about the whistle, how the sound came out. He was kind of, even as a child, he looked at things in an observational way, like a scientist would. Of course, Benjamin Franklin became a scientist too. But anyway, so he's looking at this whistle, and he thinks, "I would like to get one of those whistles, and I'll just give you all the money I have." So he just took his money and gave all the money he have, and for the whistle. He paid way too much money for that whistle. The guy said, "Oh yeah, okay, I'll take your money. I'll take your money." Took the money for the whistle. So he came home, and he was supposed to buy more food, and he could get some sweets and stuff, but instead he came home blowing on a whistle. And so his brothers put him down and said, "What? You really got ripped off." This thing is ridiculous, and it's driving us crazy. And he said, "You paid too dearly for the whistle. You know, um, to blow that whistle, that's an expensive whistle." And so later on in his life, he says, "Isn't that in life when we pay too dearly for our whistles? Those things we want to have fun with." And he'd always write that down and say, "Hey, you paid too dearly for that whistle, didn't you?" That was one of Benjamin Franklin's saying. Don't pay too much money for a toy whistle, you know, or don't pay too much money for your toys, is what he's saying. So, saying that, his brother John, he was very, looked at Benjamin like, "You're ridiculous. It's 4 times as much money, and you're not very bright when it comes to here." So Benjamin thought, John was looking down on him all the time. And later on, we'll see that he had problems with his brother John. So at 8 years old, he decides, well, they decide, but he decides that he would like to read more books. And so he was trying to get more books to read and everything. And so his uncle Benjamin, who had come from England, and who he was named after, said, Benjamin, little Benjamin, he is so bright, and he's 8 years old and so smart. He said we need to put him in school. So Benjamin gave enough money for him to start school. So Benjamin was so excited to go to school. He said, "I'm not going to let you down. I'm not going to let you down." And when he went to school, they all said, your son is a remarkable scholar for not even being in school. He's so young and he already can read and do all these things. And he says, you need to, everyone, the teacher and then everyone that saw him says, you need to give him a higher education. You make sure that he's in school. But at 9 years old, um, his brother John was getting married and his father needed help in the business. So his father said, I'm sorry, Benjamin. You're not going to be able to go to school. You're going to have to help with the candle business. Benjamin was really bummed. And his mother said, I am so sorry for Benjamin. He's dreadfully disappointed. You know, he has to work in our candle factory. It's so unpleasant to him. So he said he doesn't like wicks in his fingers and he just doesn't like it. So she went to him and said to his father, said to Josiah, said, can we get Benjamin something else to do? Well, he needs to make money instead of go to school. So they brought him first, to from making candles. So they were going to bring him first to his other brother that was working, as working with actually steel and guns and such, those kind of things. But his brother said, no, I'm not going to have Benjamin do that. So they're thinking, what can Benjamin do? So from school to the candle shop, and them needing money, it was kind of not a great opportunity for Benjamin to do much, else. And he wanted to learn and he wanted to read, So, and then he said, well, he went out to the from Boston on the coast and he saw the boats coming in and he said, I know what I want to do. One of his brothers went out to sea and he said, I would like to go out to sea. I would like to be a sailor. Yeah, that's what I want to be. And so his mother's and it's like, oh no, we never. Um, we do not want you to be. It's terrible. That'd be terrible for you to go out to sea and just be a cabin boy. That's only a 1-point talent, and you have 10 talents, way more. Please don't want to. We do not want you to go out to sea. He loved the water, and he loved watching the water, and he loved to swim. We'll find out later. He swam a lot, and he'd always find contraptions that would make him swim faster. So he wanted to swim, he wanted the water, and he loved the sea. But they were not. Especially his mother was not going to let him go out to be a sailor. So in choosing his trade, basically his mother said, certainly I would not compel a son to follow a business that he hates, as Benjamin really hates candle making. And so his brother Samuel said, well, he's a cutter. Remember I said the gun, and now he has another brother with a cutter. And but he didn't want to pay. He said, Benjamin, come work with me, but I'm not paying him. So she said, Benjamin needs to be making money. He was 12 years old, but he needed to make money. So, and he was a happy-go-lucky 12-year-old and well-liked and all. And he even went out. I think he was very in the midst of all this, even though he couldn't be a cutler, or at that point, he was so bright. He went to this place and he used some stones and he built this whole bridge-like thing and everything, and brought all these stones in. But when he brought the stones in, he took them off the land, and somebody else owned the stones. So he built this huge bridge, and everything was very beautiful. And they said, we want our stones back. And so then he had to take it all apart, and he lost all. And he said that he paid too much for a whistle. Again, putting all those stones in and have to take them all out. And he thought, I want to do something I want to do something that lasts, you know. That's Benjamin. So his brother James had just started a business on a press, printing press, that had come from England. And so they thought, well, you know, Benjamin's a really good reader and he knows letters and everything. He could be a typesetter and probably he would do that better than making candles. And so he thought, well, he can learn the trade. And so his brother James actually he said, okay, I'll take him in. And but there were some, I said, there were some misgivings about that because James went to his father and said, okay, he's going to learn the trade, and let's sign him up for apprentice. And I'll apprentice him until he's 21 years old. That's 9 years as apprentice, and very little pay, you know, but he'd have pay, but all the way apprentice until he's 21. And you know, you can imagine that's working for your brother for 9 years, and to sign up for a legal apprenticeship is kind of strange. So, but Benjamin liked the printing business, and he had some time to read at night too, because and people brought in, you know, things to be printed, so books and such and everything. So he read, and after 2 years, he was practically indispensable to his brother. His brother needed him in doing everything, and so he was very, very punctual. He was always there, you know, and he read constantly and he started studying the printing press and knew exactly how to fix it, exactly how it worked. He was a very mechanical, very mechanical. And he was, you know, and he was right in the midst of all of James' friends, and they were printing up, and they were printing a lot of things that they were printing against what was going on, you know, in England. And so as they were printing in, and all these philosophies and different things would come in, you know, Benjamin would read. Now he's only like, you know, 12 years old when he started, 14 years old now, and they would come in, these guys, and they meet with James, and they would always sit down and they drink ale and beer, and some of them would be kind of like drunk almost. And so Benjamin saw, and later on he would be called the water boy or the water American because he would drink water. He never drank ale or wine. So, but he'd look at them and say, "What are they doing?" You know, and like, "Why are they drinking?" And it really gave him a gut ache to see men that were drinking too much. He always drank cold water. That was his favorite drink. He loved to drink cold water. So, and that made him healthy too, and he lived a long time. So, anyway, he was temperate in all things. He worked 12 to 15 hours a day, and then he read. He read at night by candlelight if he could. He also was really good in sports. He was the best runner. They'd have races, you know, in the town of Boston, you can imagine, and he would win. He was a jumper, and he was a swimmer, and he was a rower. He loved to row, you know, so he got into rowing, and he got into swimming. And swimming, he made inventions, like I said, for swimming. He made pellets for his hand, and he made sandal fins for his feet. Now, they didn't have scuba diving gear back then, but he put together what he kind of like scuba diving gear with his sandals. He was just, he could invent things. And so he put these on, and then he'd join in, and they'd have a race, and with his fins, he'd beat everyone with his fins. And all the kids would say, or all these sports guys would say, "We want a set of those fins." And his feet, and he started making these kites, and we know Benjamin by kites because later he discovered electricity with a kite, you know, when he got older. But he would put the kite up and put it up, you know, in the midst of storms and everything, and see which way the air was going and everything with lightning and you know such, to the point where he realized that lightning is electricity, and then that's later on, but he was experimenting with kites, and different kinds of kites before that. So him and his friend John Collins would get together, and John Collins later on didn't, you know, had a big problem with alcohol and became an alcoholic, even though Benjamin would be encouraging him not to drink. We find that happened. And John Collins also brought in a lot of, really skeptical material, I should say, the Enlightenment movement, and these things for him to read that really made Benjamin's heart go away from the Lord, looking for the Lord until later on. So, but John Collins, they had discussions on education at that time. And of course, Benjamin didn't even get to be in school, right? But he thought, girls at that time weren't allowed to school. So he stood up and basically did discussions on girls in education. And he said, I think, and he had his sisters and everything, and he said, I think that the girls should be as educated as the boys. I like that about Benjamin. He said right what he thought. And all the girls would be smiling, I'm sure. But anyway, so he was actually 100 years ahead of his time in the education of girls, because basically girls weren't allowed to go to school till like 100 years later than that. So, but in his printing business, his brother would thought to start a newspaper. And so he started this newspaper called the New England Courant. And the New England Courant basically was a wild project of James, because James was into um, um, politically standing against anything that was in English, because the English were persecuting America at that time in a lot of different ways. And so, in fact, you go back to Boston, the Stamp Act, and they were just all taxing Americans, and that soldiers could come in, quarter in, right in where any place they want, and all the things that were happening was abuse of Americans, by the English. And so James, in the very beginnings, him and his friends, they started writing, and they put together one of the first, newspapers. You know, well, Benjamin loved the idea of a newspaper. Oh my goodness! And so Benjamin would listen to them and listen to their philosophies and the way they talked. And some of them were considered radicals and liberals and all kinds of stuff. And they would put these articles. Well, Benjamin thought, I'm going to start writing. But of course, his brother is like, get him out of here. He doesn't know anything or whatever. But Benjamin's thought, well, you know what? I'm going to write anonymously. So I'm going to start writing, and I'll just pretend and give myself a different name. And then James won't know, and these guys won't know it's me writing. So I'll just write, and they will see what happens. So he started writing an article. Like each night he wrote, it was mystery. This mystery then, because these articles would be like put under the door, and his brother and his friends would look and they'd read and say, "Oh my goodness, it's by." He named himself Silence Dogood. He said, "I wonder who Silence Dogood is," and they'd write it. It was a pseudo name writer, or they're hiding their names. Who is this guy? He must really be intelligent. And so Benjamin had been writing these stories, for the newspaper, and so they'd be printed by anonymous. Little to say, he's a teenager. And so he's writing these. James later on, then pretty soon, Benjamin thought, I better tell James. He's going to be really mad because he kept printing them and he kept wondering who that was. It must be this philosophical guy that's coming in from wherever. Let's catch him and all. And finally, Benjamin sat down. He said, I have to tell you the truth. He felt bad. He goes, the anonymous writer is me. So James, he got really, really, angry and irritable at him. Like, I can't believe it. I can't believe you pulled this on me and everything. And he was upset with him. And I think that's what really brought the rift between his brother James, and him. But the newspaper, the Courant, was called the Courant, and it got in trouble because some of the articles were intolerant of the British Tories, or the British control. And so they came in, of course, Britain came in and censored the newspaper and actually put James into jail for 4 weeks for talking against the British government. Now, this is before the Revolution, before American Revolution. And so James, and during that 4-week period, then the newspaper just kept going, because guess who was taking care of the newspaper and writing and printing and doing everything? Benjamin. Benjamin the teenager. He was a teenager. He had to run the newspaper when James was gone. So he learned how to administer, business. He learned how to put a newspaper together. He learned all these things, and he learned what things you should write and what things you shouldn't write. Or, basically Benjamin that time became very aware of what was going on in the world, didn't he? They called him the boy editor, and the current club, the club of guys would come to keep the newspaper going with him, and until James got back. And Benjamin was not forbidden to keep writing because he was only the apprentice to do there, so they couldn't arrest him. He was young and he was just an apprentice, so they couldn't take him to jail. They decided he was too young and he was, of course, he couldn't do anything. So he was the youngest editor and youngest supervisor and youngest publisher in the whole land, probably ever. You know, he became had the news going and the printing going, and he kept running fire against representatives of the British too, seeing what the British was doing. And as a teenager, he would write some of that stuff in there too. So Benjamin was always in the right place at the right time, huh? But all of this and all this reading caused him to be a skeptic in many ways. And so, because he was surrounded by young doubters of the Enlightenment movement, that was away from God. So, John Collins, his trouble friend, the drinker friend, basically gave him some books. And Shastri and Collins was kind of a book that was very skeptical about belief in God and pretty atheistic. And so Benjamin came to doubt, some of the Puritan church that he had been raised in, and the Orthodox church. He began to doubt them, and then seeking to know more about God, but he wasn't sure. So he'd read some of this stuff, and of course, the stuff would affect. It was very humanistic. Um, so one time, his father, you know, um, his father would say grace over dinner all the time because his father was a very devout Puritan, very devout Christian, and Benjamin basically said, well, let's just instead of saying grace at dinner, let's just say grace over the whole barrel of food out here, and then we could have grace said for the whole week. That did not go well with his dad at all. You know, um, his father called it irreverence, and his brother said, well, probably his brother said, Benjamin, he's just probably an atheist. You remember his brother was jealous when he came back from jail, and said really wasn't wanting to have Benjamin, to be in charge anymore. So the more we see Benjamin was becoming more skeptical, but really he was searching. Really, he was searching to see is he looked at his Christianity, as a being raised. There's that point that he had to actually, choose the way he was going to go. You can't, just because his father's Christian didn't make him a Christian, right? So he had a time where he had to examine, what he wanted with his faith, and he put it aside for a little bit. So Benjamin, he wanted to quit the apprenticeship. Remember, he had to go nine years, and he was underage. 16, 17, I think it was around that age, maybe 16. And so James would not let him go because he was making money and he hardly paid him anything. So James like, I'm not going to let him go. And so Benjamin was angry, and James says, you're an atheist and skeptic and everything. In the meantime, he'd get really mad and he'd discipline him. He actually would take him out and punish him, like whip him, because he was and so Benjamin became, like, I don't want to work for James. He was mean. James had been mean to him. And Benjamin kind of Benjamin's dad, Josiah, kind of stood behind James, but he didn't know the whole story, what was going on, that he was actually being spanked and beat when he was like, from even when he was younger. And so, and being around these guys and stuff, it was that were drinking and whatever. It wasn't the best place, but anyway, his so he devised a scheme, and the scheme was that he would run away because he figured his dad wasn't going to do anything. He did not want to work 9 years with his brother that now was treating him badly and paying him very little, and plus had even been abusive to him. So his friend John Collier made up a lie, and he said, "You know what? I'll help you leave, and we'll say that you had to run away from a girl's family because that that you were courting this girl and they got mad and you had to run away." And of course, Ben just said, "I don't want to lie on all that and everything." They said, "Oh, let's just do it. That'd be a good way for you to run away if you're running away." But of course, he had to run away and not tell his family and not tell his brother. So he was 16 when he ran away, and he ran away on a boat, and it was a very rough journey. And his family didn't know, and his dad and mom were very sad, didn't know what happened to him. Um, Before that, he decided that before he didn't want to eat meat. He was like a vegetarian for a while, in the midst of he kind of took a stand, kind of an animal against eating animals for a while. I don't know what that was. But when he took this journey, as he got on the boat, um, he had to eat meat again. He knew that he needed to eat meat, especially fish. So he started eating meat again, which is kind of weird, but that's what happened. He always had these thoughts like, is it, should we be eating animals? And, should I be a vegetarian? Should I, and so, he was thinking of always thinking of things like something that you and I would probably never think about. So, but he appeared to be on a highway of ruin. He's only 16. He got on the ship boat in Boston. He was leaving his printing job, had very little money, and that's when some of his biggest trials would start. And so, in fact, um, on the boat, this is before I'm going to actually quit here and we'll start again for the rest of his life because it's so amazing. But on the boat, I just have to say one of the trials that started on the boat is that there was a Dutchman that was on the boat and he was drinking. Now, you know why Benjamin did not like anything to do with alcohol. The Dutchman was falls overboard drinking. He was singing and falling overboard. He was drowning, and of course, Benjamin could, definitely swim. He was the swim champion. So he jumps in and he saves the Dutchman's life. And so the Dutchman, as he gets the drunk comes to and everything, and he's very very thankful, you know, grateful that Benjamin saved his life. And so he gives him one thing that he has, and it's a book. And the name of the book is Pilgrim's Progress. And it was a book that was written, back by John Bunyan, and, during a time, little prior, right around that time, a little prior to this, I should say, the time that Benjamin, but it was a book that became one of Benjamin's favorite books on an allegory of, the Christian walk with God. And so he started reading Pilgrim's Progress, and then he started realizing, what kind of faith do I have? And he was given Pilgrim's Progress by this drunk Dutchman, and it was actually he learned to read Dutch, in the midst of all this. So in the midst of running away, took a while on this boat, and the boat was leaking, and he had to save everybody on board because he was a really good rower, and so he had to start rowing and rowing and rowing and rowing to keep the boat because the boat was leaking. And everybody said, "Yay, we have Benjamin!" And he's like strong. So he again said, "I'm paying too much for the whistle, in life. I'm paying too much for the whistle. I have nothing, and I've paid too much." And then he became sick with a fever and a cold, and and in the midst, You know, he bought some of his last food. He was pretty much homeless and stinking his clothes, you know. And then when he bought his bread, he decided with his bread he brought too much bread, actually big pieces of bread, and that he would share them with the homeless instead of eat them. Even though he needed to eat, he needed to eat. And then we find him going in as he landed. He visits it. He goes to a church because the people of the church would help him. And this church was a Quaker church, which I always thought that Benjamin Franklin was a Quaker, but he wasn't. He was raised Puritan in Boston, but he had, from this point as a teenager, he became familiar with the Quakers. And the Quakers were very nice to him and helped him at this time when he appeared like he was a homeless kid. Isn't that the way God does? Think of Benjamin Franklin later on in his life, um, you know, being writing, being of the five writers that wrote the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution and everything, all of the science and everything that he's did. He was like homeless, from a homeless boy to, an ambassador to France and England. So anyway, let's stop there because we want to know more about Benjamin Franklin.